Yo, yo, yo. Welcome back to the Around the 412 Fantasy Football Show, brought to you, as always, by Keeks Barbershop in Rochester, PA. I am Smitty. That is Joe. That is Drew. What's going on, fellas?
What's up, man? We're in preseason football mode. Let's find our bell cows today. I'm ready. Let's get it.
I just realized I should have taken a week before this because I got to go. So I'm going to have to, push through.
What? Unbelievable.
And
if you have to step away, I guess.
Done.
Yeah, we had what, like a 6-minute delay here. Thanks.
Yeah, let's just try to get you off the phone.
Yeah. But welcome in, everybody. As always, I'm just going to sit back and let Drew and Joe do the talking. So go ahead, guys.
Sounds good.
What do you guys want to start with? You want to start with, there are some injuries to talk about. Zach Wilson actually looked like maybe his season was going to come to an end before it even started. But they did some good news there. Probably as good of a news as you could really hope for, considering what that looked like it was going to be. But let's start with there. Zach Wilson himself, I guess. I don't know how much fantasy value he really brings to the table in a redraft league, but also for the weapons around him as well. Like Elijah Moore is a guy that a lot of people are expecting a second-year breakout from. Corey Davis was his favorite target last year from start to finish. What's the impact here of a Zach Wilson injury?
I was kind of thinking that it was going to help Elijah Moore personally with him being out.
Yeah, that's interesting.
All of his good games really took off after Zach Wilson got injured last year. So it'll be interesting to see. I mean, obviously the Jets and fans anticipate him taking a step forward, but we're also at a time of the year where everybody's better. Everybody's in the best shape of their life. But he looked pretty terrible before the injury. So I don't have a lot of confidence in Wilson. Obviously, you don't want to wish ill will on people. It's good to see that he survived. I have no idea how you get a non-contact injury and get a bone bruise out of it, but we'll see what happens. That's why we have Dr. Drew.
Does Dr. Drew have thoughts on how you get a bone bruise in a non-contact injury?
Well, he tore his meniscus, so he had that shaved today. And they said it would be 2 to 4 weeks, but now they're saying that they don't know when he'll be back because they want him to be 100% before he does. He might not even miss time, though. We don't know.
That is that same knee that he hurt last year, though? Or no,
yeah.
Was it the other one?
Yeah,
it is the same one?
Last year in that same knee.
Okay, right.
There was some thought that he did the same thing.
So, Drew, you and I think, both kind of found it interesting when Joe said that about the fantasy impact for Elijah Moore. What is your take on that? Do you think the same thing, or were you kind of hoping these guys are both going to take off in year 2 together?
I mean, Mike White actually came in last year, and he was killing it for that little bit before he got hurt. But the biggest contributions to that offense after Wilson went down was actually to Michael Carter. So I don't know if maybe this helped Breece Hall, because I still think that he's going to take majority of that workload. They moved up in the draft, obviously, to go get him. But Elijah Moore will still benefit a little bit. I don't know if I trust the unibrow, though. I just think that he's crap.
Hey, dude, to Joe's point about training camp and just the time to talk everybody up, man, you would think Joe Flacco was like $100 million quarterback, the way that they're talking about him around the Jets. Yeah.
That was
still right now.
Ruined that for you guys. Ruined them.
We do have some Derek's already in here. What's your dynasty thoughts on Waddle? Interestingly enough, Jalen Waddle was going to be brought up in this show. So do we want to save this or keep it in our back pocket, or do we want to make Derek wait?
We could just answer the question now. I think it's a dynasty question. So I would say that I have him probably pretty high. I do not have him above Higgins though, and that all surrounds Tua, obviously. I don't see Tua really taking the step forward based on his projections for the year. They're pretty generous. So if you look last year, he averaged about 211 passing yards a game. His attempts were pretty low. And they also brought in Tyreek Hill. Tyreek has some opt-outs a couple of years into the deal. If Tua doesn't bring it home this year, I imagine that they're going to find somebody that can throw the ball a little bit better. But Joe Burrow, we know, is a stud. If you look, and we were talking about this right before the show, if you look at weeks 4 through 17, Chase and Higgins actually, from a target perspective, expected fantasy points. They were pretty much in line with one another. Chase has that game-breaking talent that, not that T. Higgins doesn't have it, but Chase is just on a different planet in that regard. So he has those bigger explosive weeks, but Higgins is somebody that I'm really confident in for this season and moving forward. So I think in both cases, for redraft and for dynasty, I would prefer to have Higgins.
Drew?
I mean, I'm a little higher on Waddle than Joe is personally. I think that Tua is just trash. I just don't think he has that deep ball. I think
Sorry, too, if you watch the show, by the way.
Yeah. Go ahead, block me on Twitter. I don't even care.
He cares.
I just don't think Tua has that deep ball. How many times have we seen that video of him throwing that ball to Tyreek Hill and it just wobbles after like 15 yards and just hits the ground? Like,
yeah, which one are you talking about? Because I think there's multiple clips of this happening.
I really don't understand that though, because like he was like grip it and rip it. Like even when he came onto the scene in Alabama, it was like, oh, fourth quarter national championship game. Here's this 50-yard bomb. Like,
but bro,
where
like,
did it go? Was it just the injuries like piling up that he doesn't have the lower body to do it?
Yeah, think about how much of your core it takes to throw a football deep, and he broke his hip.
Like, I'm sure somebody's done this, but I'd be interested to watch like that year at Bama, his mechanics compared to where they're at now, and see what's changed, if anything. Because I'm assuming something has.
He jammed his femur down into his hip and just completely popped it out and just lost all of his lower body strength. They're saying that he actually looks better like pre-injury this year, so we'll see. But we were talking about it. Like
we could keep going back to Joe's point, but who doesn't look better right now?
Well, Jalen Waddle's ADOT was 6. So if Tyreek Hill is taking defenders deep, it's just going to open up the flat a little more for him. And I think that he's going to need the volume to produce. He had 140 targets last year to be where he was. But if he has at least like 6 or 7 targets a game, they're going to be high percentage throws that should be completed. He should be viable. But he's going at like wide receiver 14 right now, which is a little bit of concern for me. That's a little too high, but especially where you're looking at other guys. But long term in Dynasty, I still think that he's a good asset. And if you get nervous, I'm sure someone out there would come right up to your doorstep and ask for him in a trade. So
I think his stock was higher before the Tyreek Hill news. I mean, going into this season, it was like this guy's a PPR machine, number 1 target. He's lost that a little bit.
I don't think it's fallen as much as you think, though.
No, he's actually rated right now like higher than Tyreek Hill just because of age.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's a big question mark into the season. I don't think that both of them can be fantasy viable this year in terms of like being top 30 options. Which one is it going to be? I'm going to follow the money. But to your point, if Tua can't throw the long ball, then we could see a scenario where Tyreek Hill has a huge free fall compared to what he's been doing with Mahomes and the gang in Kansas City.
Before the show, I told Joe that it literally depends on the day how I feel. Sometimes I'm like looking at Tyreek and that money, and I'm just like, you have to give him the ball. And then sometimes I see a tweet with Tua just thrown in the dirt, and I'm just like, I don't give a crap about the money.
And then there's other days where you remember they brought in a new head coach, Magic Mike from San Fran, and he loves running the football. So, speaking of San Fran and running backs, Elijah Mitchell's next up on the injury list here. What's going on with him?
Yeah, so I'll tie him together with, as Joe said earlier today, Mike Sanders from Philadelphia. They both have
yikes.
They both have hamstring injuries. They're just sitting Elijah Mitchell down for the entire preseason and saying we're going to look at where he's at week 1. Miles Sanders is still early. I'm not sure what their plan is in terms of how he's going to go about the next few weeks, but they both have hamstring injuries. Those tend to linger all season. I was already fading both players. Miles Sanders is an enigma. I don't know what he's like, who he is or anything. He's going to have positive regression because it's hard to match 0 touchdowns in a season. But Elijah Mitchell, I'm afraid of any San Francisco backfield every year. Ever since JaMychal Hasty decided to be the big player of the week on Thursday Night Football, he gets 1 carry and gives me 0 points. I just can't do it. I'm just scarred by that offense.
I hope that Mitchell continues to fall, actually. He's right. We were talking about this earlier, but he's right in the running back dead zone where it's like Gibson is not sounding good coming out of camp and is like demoted to like
he's
third down.
He's just going to line up on special teams.
Josh Jacobs, not a lot of people are talking too much about. I'm not really interested in J.K. Dobbins, although you may disagree. A.J. Dillon, solid RB2 with upside if his co-partner gets injured, but it's like, where is that volume?
What did you say about J.K. Dobbins?
It's just he's just not for me. I don't feel comfortable with him. He's just like a need to see it to believe it kind of thing. He's draft hype from 2 years ago, but we haven't really seen it translate on the field yet. Although his rookie year, he was pretty elusive, but I don't know. Remains to be seen. He's still the RB2 behind Lamar in that offense. And then you're looking at guys like CEH, Kareem Hunt, Chase Edmonds. So to me, if I could pick anybody out of that, even though Elijah Mitchell doesn't get the volume in the passing game, he was getting 18.8 carries per game last year, which is pretty hard to ignore. If you look historically,
20, right?
Yeah, and if you look historically at like San Francisco, there is this conception that they have like committee style approach, but they really just are constantly getting hurt.
And he's going to get hurt.
Right.
You just know that he's going to miss games.
Yeah.
So if you handcuff him and you're positive in who your handcuff is, I'm with you in that position. Antonio Gibson's just Simchez in here. CEH is a bum. He had 4 red zone carries last year. End it.
Who's he?
The man
Brandon
came
Bolden?
into training camp with a popped lung. Let the boy live.
He's basically Brandon Bolden in the red zone.
But yeah, I don't think I would want Elijah Mitchell to be my running back too, but I feel really good about him being like that third option.
That area that you mentioned he's definitely the best player in that tier.
Yeah.
He is going to miss games, so you just have to feel like you know who their backup is, which Tyrion, was it Jones Price or Davis Price? TDP?
Yeah.
Like
TDP.
they're raving about him in camp.
Mhm.
But, I mean,
Trey
I
Sermon,
thought
You know
too.
what?
Casey
Don't
was
make me keep
good.
saying it. Don't make me keep saying it about guys raving about other guys in camp.
Sometimes they're right.
Yeah.
George Pickens.
Yeah, true. Well, there you go. Hey, great segue. Rookie receiver Drake London is the last player to talk about here in the injury report. We saw him get banged up in their preseason game. Doesn't sound like it's too serious, but what do we think about that one?
So he has a knee injury. They're just taking him week to week. As simple as that. They're going to see how he feels next week. They're not going to play him in preseason week 2, and we'll see if he has any snaps in week 3. But they're not talking much about what his injury is. It's obviously not serious, though.
Yeah, I was very nervous. I have a lot of shares in Drake London in Dynasty. So when I heard Drake London knee injury, I was like, come on, man. Why you got to do me like that? It will be interesting just because there's so many new moving parts in the Atlanta offense. Like, does that negatively impact him early? I anticipate that he'll slide down draft boards a little bit. Right now, he's going like in the 9th or 10th round, give or take. But it will be interesting to see. I mean, there's not really a ton of competition for targets outside of Kyle Pitts. So you have to imagine that Mariota is going to be leaning heavily on Pitts and building that chemistry with him if London's not able to get on the field. But if London is to miss any time, I don't know if I have anybody even in my top 100 receivers. Bryan Edwards would be next in line in Atlanta.
They're both going to feast. Him and Pitts are going to feast.
So it'll be interesting to see. I don't think over time that Bryan Edwards is going to overtake London or anything like that, but it could be a play first couple weeks of the season where it's like, all right, as Drake's getting more familiar with the offense, do you pop like Bryan Edwards and maybe like a DFS play or something like that, or use him as like a last round pick for early weeks? But yeah, we'll see. There's not a lot there.
Right. Yeah, it came out today. I saw a report. It was like Falcons plan to utilize Kyle Pitts heavily in the red zone. I was like, oh, nice. Like, great report.
It only took 1 year, though. He had 1 touchdown last year.
Yeah, but that's just Atlanta's
crazy
thing. Look at Julio, man. They would never get him touchdowns in the red zone. It's just
yeah,
like
what he only has like one. He only has like one career year where he has double-digit touchdowns.
Yeah.
All right, so let's move on. We're kind of talking. Do you guys want to start with wide receivers or tight ends?
Probably wide receivers, right?
Sure.
Hey, you said it first. I was just trying to make somebody pick, and Drew said wide receivers first. All right, let's do it then. What do we got to talk about?
So I think there's a lot of interest.
Oh, I thought you were about to show me a piece of paper. Drew was like flipping. I thought he was just going to put it up to the camera.
I printed out that new picture that we have of that dude.
Oh, okay. All right.
Your brother.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of interesting receiver battles. Not in the sense that like, all right, who's going to win this spot in camp, but you have a lot of situations. It's kind of what we alluded to at the beginning of the show that it's like, all right, which of these two guys am I going to choose? So we talked a little bit about Miami with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. I think another one that is very popular is going to be the Cortland Sutton versus Jerry Jeudy debate for this season. Drew, did you have anything you wanted to add on the Miami topic?
No, I mean, it's a double-edged sword. Do you believe in Tyreek Hill and Tua's arm, or do you think that it's going to be short passing game? So
yeah,
whatever you believe in, I'm fine with either.
So one thing I did want to bring up is I've been doing a lot of research in the last couple of days about what is the likelihood that a quarterback is going to be able to sustain 2 or more receivers and have a top 30 output for over the course of the year. So it's happened 46 times since 2015. And looking at the numbers, the lowest number of yards that a quarterback has had is 37.19, which is going to be 218.8 yards per game. And then the other big piece is the attempts. So something that I found was that it's really not touchdown correlated. We've had situations where QBs have had under 20 touchdown passes and supported 2 QBs. So really the two things to look for is, do they have the volume, especially in a PPR format? They may not be scoring a lot of touchdowns, but they're throwing the ball a lot. It's got to land somewhere. And the other piece is the yards. So if we're looking at the numbers here, 95% of the quarterbacks that supported 2 wide receivers, they had at least 230 yards per game. If we're looking at stats from last year, Tua topped out. He was at 204 yards per game. So he's going to need like another 25 yards or so to hit that minimum threshold. About 75% were at 250 or more, which is a much larger jump. So to me, I don't think it's feasible. I know that there's a lot of talk about Tua being able to do this and support both, but frankly, I don't see it. I think if you feel one way or the other about those 2 guys, I'm going to follow the money, but I don't think it's sustainable. I think one of them is going to fall outside of the top 30 this year. And I suspect that it's going to be Waddle, especially knowing that Gesicki is still there in the slot as well, and he gets a lot of slot snaps. But I think they end up fighting into each other. The other thing to note is that it's a lot harder to get a number 1 wide receiver whenever there is a second player that's there. I think Kupp would have been on pace and probably would have hit it last year. Even with Robert Woods there. Robert Woods was like wide receiver 12, which bodes well for Allen Robinson coming into this year. But the number 2 wideout in that scenario is averaged out at wide receiver 22. So even if they were to hit that, there's only been, let's see here, 8 instances in the last 7 years or so where we've had 2 number 1 wide receiver seasons. And that would have been like Metcalf and Lockett, Antonio Brown, Juju Smith-Schuster, Nelson and Adams, Jefferson, Thielen. Thielen's actually on this list a few times. But it's very hard to have 2 players ranked where they are in their ADP performing at that level. So one will probably be a lower end wide receiver 1. If Tua is able to take the next step, the other one will probably be a lower wide receiver 2. For me, I don't want to take that risk that early in the draft. I would rather go after somebody that I think is going to be a lead target getter, or somebody that's more locked in to having that possibility happen. So if we're thinking about Tyreek Hill, he's going around guys like CeeDee Lamb, Mike Evans, Keenan Allen, A.J. Brown, or even like Stephon Diggs. I would much rather have Diggs in that scenario, CeeDee Lamb in that scenario. If you're thinking about Waddle, the tier that he's in with Brown, Higgins, Pittman, Deontay Johnson, McLaren, I would say Waddle probably falls in the bottom of that tier for me, just because the opportunity is more sustainable for somebody like T. Higgins, who's a number 2 wide receiver, but Joe Burrow throws for 4,800 yards last year. His attempts are over 500 attempts on the season. But yeah, it's not going to be sustainable for them to have them both produce, or Tua as being way undervalued by everybody in the community. But I think the Tua is garbage. So
me too.
Once again, Tua, sorry if you're watching.
Yeah, he's trash.
I'm not sorry. Get better, not bitter.
Yeah, just throw the football with a spiral far. It's not that hard. I might have missed when you were going through that, but what would you say like the range of amount of pass attempts in a season you would want to see for a guy to potentially?
So the lowest number of pass attempts on the season was 495 for the team. That averages to be around about 29. So you're looking at about 30 pass attempts a game. If we're looking at what Tua did last year on that regard, it wasn't that far off. He was actually, with the games that he played, he was at about 29.84. They're projecting.
What about in general, though, not just Tua?
The initial number is around 29 in general for people that have supported 2 wide receivers. Tua's number is right at that lower threshold. The average, though, is 36.
Okay. Since you kind of brought up DK and Tyler Lockett, I want to transition into that point now. Because my stats kind of go off of what you were just talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So the reason why I'm fading DK Metcalf, I love DK Metcalf, the player. I think he's
just for context, Drew, fading him at entirely fading
at his
ADP.
Okay. At his ADP, because obviously if he starts to slide, there's going to be a point where he's draftable.
Right. So, and right now he's going in the 4th round.
Right.
Yeah.
So he's going in the 4th round, as you said, around Deontay, Mike Williams, Terry McLaurin, Jalen Waddle, Brandon Cooks, and Courtland Sutton. And I'm going to make this easy. We talk about Tua being trash. Drew Lock and Geno Smith are historically horrible quarterbacks.
QB1s.
Yes, horrible. To the point where I looked up and I wanted to document how bad they truly sucked. So Drew Lock in his entire career has only 3 games in which he threw above 300 passing yards. He only has 7 games in his entire career where he threw more than 1 touchdown pass. Geno
7 more than you.
Give me a chance. I might be able to beat him. Geno Smith, 3 games in more than 300 passing yards and 7 games in more than 1 TD. So both of them match at that point. They only have combined, both of them together, in their entire careers, 5 total games where they threw for more than 1 touchdown and at least 300 yards combined in 1 game.
Right. I mean,
so if you're looking at that, and their highest passing attempts they've ever had in a season was 443, each of them.
Sure.
They're obviously Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf are going to eat into each other. And personally, Pete Carroll, for some reason, likes to run the ball unless it's the red zone in the Super Bowl where he decides to pass it. This dude is not going to be able to sustain either of those wide receivers at their ADPs. Tyler Lockett's obviously dropping a ton, so maybe he's draftable by anyone other than me. But they're going to eat into each other. And if they're behind, I think it's going to be a Michael Carter situation where you're going to see Kenneth Walker just getting a lot of dump offs. And it's not going to be Rashad Penny, which we can just get rid of. He only has 1 career reception over his time. Obviously, he's been hurt for as long as he's been.
Does he really? That's amazing.
Yeah, I couldn't believe it. Someone sent that to me, and I was just like,
he should retire right now, so he just finishes with 1 for sure.
Yeah.
Tom Brady has more catches than that. That's
So
no, he has 23 in his career. Put some respect on the man.
Did he? It might have been last year then. 1 reception last year.
He had 6.
Someone sent me something. All right, I don't even know what the hell's going on. I'm clearly wrong. I have no idea where I got that. Someone sent that to me though. I swear.
But he obviously is not a pass catching back.
Right. It's going to be going to Kenneth Walker. And if they're going to be behind the way I think that they're going to be behind and just doing dump offs, I don't think that you're looking at DK having to have a nice long 50-yard touchdown for me to feel comfortable with him being in my lineup each week.
So just some.
What if OBJ was playing quarterback?
Probably better. Honestly,
Jarvis Landry, actually. I like Jarvis. He's probably my favorite wide receiver outside of Antoine Randall.
I was just say, hold on a minute.
Just look at what they have done to Big Booty Judy, Courtland Sutton. Neither of those quarterbacks have ever had a top 40 wide receiver in fantasy.
True. But there's a couple of things. One, the stats that I gave earlier are only for supporting two receivers, just to make sure that
Right.
clear for the show, right?
Yeah, but like
I think the other thing is if you look at last year for Seattle, Russ only put up like 220 yards a game, mostly because of the finger injury. And
we were talking about DK being bad all season. He was a regular discussion topic on this podcast that he was not living up to what he was drafted at.
Well, yeah, but he was also drafted as a second-round pick. I mean, if you're dropping him full,
I still don't think fourth is enough based on these quarterbacks.
Yeah, and I think that's a valid. Yeah, and I think it's a valid strategy discussion, or like, how do you feel about it? We feel differently, and that's totally cool. But would you rather have a number one target on a bad offense, or would you rather have a number two target on a better offense? And like,
would you rather have Terry McLaurin, who's the number one on his offense, in the same range?
Oh, for sure. I would much rather have Terry McLaurin, but I think ADP reflects that as well.
Is there a tier, though, where we think that DK should probably be in, that he's being overdrafted right now? I feel he's being overdrafted.
I would take him just players that I would say like are in like suitable situations. I would take him over Jalen Waddle. I would take him over both Denver receivers just because I can't decide which one it's going to be.
Right. Yeah, that's absolutely.
And then I would take him over. See, like, here's a good one for you. Who would you rather have? I know who you're going to answer. But would you rather have Chris Godwin or would you rather have DK?
Well, Chris Godwin's going in like the 8th round, and I have no reservations about his ACL. He started practicing today in full.
Chris Godwin's going 8th round in ESPN.
I think Chris Godwin is Tom Brady's top target.
That is accurate.
I think Mike Evans is touchdown dependent. I'd much rather have Chris Godwin, not even hesitation. I would much rather. What about Brandon Cooks in that tier?
Oh man, now you're going to put me on the block against the long neck Davis Mills. Yeah. I would probably
he definitely watches the show, so
I would. Oh, that's a tough one. That's like a really good because. Yeah, I don't know. I would probably take DK Metcalf. I think he's a better player.
His upside is obviously off the charts, and we're chasing that, obviously. But if you're looking for a safe bet, I'd rather have Brandon Cooks because you can't explain it, but he does it every year.
Yeah, but I think that's something to consider, and it's a good thing when you're getting into lineup construction, especially when you get into the later rounds. Obviously, at the top of the board, you're going to have everybody who's a wide receiver one, who has like good target volume, like all that stuff. But then when you get into the later rounds and it's like, would you rather have Devonta Smith, who is a Heisman Trophy winner but has Jalen Hurts throwing him the ball, or would you rather go after someone like Juju, Rashad Bateman, who are probably going to be the number one receiving option from a wide receiver perspective? Those are the kind of things I think about. Or like, would you rather take Chase Claypool, who's looking to be the third target getter on his team in the 10th? Like, to me, that probably doesn't make sense. Give me Robert Woods or somebody like that who has that wide receiver one upside. That doesn't mean that Robert Woods is going to have the highest scoring week of the season compared to Chase Claypool, but it's a lot harder to figure out when you're going to start those players.
Bobby Tree is going to be a top 20 wide receiver this year.
Could be. I think Treylon Burks is getting the Jamar Chase treatment right now, so it'll be interesting to see how it pans out.
I like Treylon, but Robert Woods is going to get those high percentage throws, and PPR he's going to do enough. His knee is apparently in immaculate shape off that ACL.
Yeah,
unlike Devin Bush's.
The Rams doctors are just phenomenal. They really are. Look what they did with Cooper Kupp.
TJ Watt.
I forgot about him having the knee issue. Well, you mentioned Jamar Chase like 30 seconds ago, and I thought it would be a great segue, but we've since continued to talk. But we had the Bengals receivers on here next. We kind of already touched on because of a question. T. Higgins, obviously Jamar Chase is the upside that he does. Tyler Boyd's in the mix there. I mean, how does this wide receiver room shake out from a fantasy perspective?
Yeah, I mean, they are one of the few instances where there's been 4 instances where 3 wide receivers have been supported in a given season. So the one that was the most interesting that came out was 2020 Carolina Panthers, Robbie Anderson, Curtis Samuel, DJ Moore. All top 30 wide receivers in 2020.
We're going to do that this year.
What's that?
I was just kidding. They're not going to do that this year.
It would be something. But yeah, Chase, Higgins, and Boyd, they were wide receiver 5, wide receiver 20, wide receiver 29, respectively. We touched on it earlier about how Chase and Higgins both pretty much had identical expected volume stats and kind of like fantasy per game output. Their offensive line has improved, so Joey B should probably be taking a little bit less abuse. I think the only thing that could potentially cap downside is if they are getting out and getting ahead early and then they're just running the ball to kill the clock. But I wouldn't worry about it. Joe Burrow has proven to be an elite quarterback in the league. They have all of the pieces there that seem to be a formidable offense. If you can snag Higgins in the fourth, I think that I would rather have Higgins than Chase just in terms of like value. I would rather have a high-end running back in the back end of the first round and then get Higgins later because that drop-off isn't there by that much.
I couldn't agree more. We've talked about this. I love T. Higgins where he's being drafted. He had more targets per game last year than Jamar Chase. And I think Jamar Chase is going to have negative touchdown regression because the type of touchdowns that he scores are like crazy, just burning past a corner, or he takes a slant to the house for 60 yards. I watched him completely decimate my lineup in the championship last year. Those types of touchdowns are hard to replicate week in and week out. So I'd rather have Higgins at his ADP, who could produce roughly the same amount of over a full season.
Higgins, right. I mean, just from a real life perspective too, Higgins was such a miss by me in that draft. I didn't like him at all.
And the Philadelphia Eagles.
Well,
they missed him and Justin Jefferson with that.
Yeah, I mean, they miss a receiver every single year.
So what does that say about Devontae Smith then?
What does that say about JJ
Arcega White?
Yeah,
I forgot that he existed until he got
traded. Made him a tight end and then traded him, and he's a receiver again. Oh, he went to Seattle, right? Yeah,
he got
traded. Metcalf, hot seat.
Yeah, he's in trouble now.
J Jaw's coming for that. Yeah, but it will be interesting to see.
Go
ahead.
We've been talking a bit about kind of like draft strategy today, Drew. I know you had mentioned that you wanted to go running back pretty early and get like your two guys probably within the first 5 rounds or so. Who's somebody that's in the middle rounds that you're targeting pretty heavy that you think could exceed ADP this year?
Running backs or wide receivers?
Wide receivers.
I did talk about I do like Hollywood Brown. Chris Godwin's going a little later because of his ACL. I love him.
You talked about Brown before the show.
Right, yeah.
But what about for the people?
I like Hollywood Brown. I just think that they have that history. And I know that you were saying that you're worried about when DeAndre Hopkins comes back, if he's still going to get the volume, and we know Zach Ertz is going to have a role. But they traded a first-round pick to go get him. That just speaks so much to me in terms of what they expect out of Hollywood Brown coming into this season. Also, he's still playing for a contract. He hasn't actually been extended. So he's playing for that money. I love him this year.
Where's he being drafted?
He's going like 6 or 7.
Yes, his average ADP is 67.8 across all drafting platforms.
And because of where he's falling, I've seen him drop farther because he's in like a weird tier where there's a lot of guys that like based on their big Holly Ass Brown. I like that. There's bigger names that are in his tier that people are targeting. That's causing him to push. So I
Holly would not draft Brown.
I hated him when he was in Baltimore, but he's not in Baltimore anymore. So
right. Joe, I mean, do you have any thoughts on Hollywood Brown?
I have concerns about Hollywood.
I feel like we haven't talked about him at all.
No, we really haven't. I think there's a couple of things that looked really good for him last year. 9 targets a game. He was very close to over 2 in yards per route run. But going to Arizona, it's a little bit crowded, and it's how do they mold the offense around the talent that they have? So I think Zach Ertz is primed to have a really good first 6 weeks without DeAndre Hopkins playing. I think him and Brown will definitely be the top 2 target getters while Hopkins is out. But what happens when Hopkins returns? I mean, dude is obviously maybe lost a step or two, but he's still DeAndre Hopkins, and it's like, if you remember last year, it was like Christian Kirk would have a good game, then Hopkins would have a big game, and like the targets, it was kind of just like almost game plan dependent, more so than like, all right, like Kyler is going to do like all this like consistency every week. The one thing that I would say is if I draft Marquise Brown, if Kyler continues to progress in the same manner that he does in previous years, where he comes out white hot first 6-7 weeks of the season, I would probably trade Marquise Brown at that point and sell high. I'm sure that other people are going to have that same thought, like, oh, the value is not there as much because Hopkins is coming back. But I don't know. I have not a lot of trust in Kyler Murray. He's a great fantasy quarterback, but what will that look like in terms of sustainability for the three of them?
What did Christian Kirk's finish last year?
Let's see.
He finished at wide receiver 26, and I don't think he's as talented as Hollywood Brown. I don't think he's as talented. I definitely see Hollywood Brown being a wide receiver 2 this year, and you're getting him in the 6th round.
I just don't see him moving into the slot, so I don't know what that means if you have both of them on the boundary, and it's like, is Ertz going to be the beneficiary? Because whenever what's his face? Christian Kirk was at his best was when he was operating out of the slot. That's when he was most successful in the offense. When they moved him to the boundary, then AJ Green like took over, which I guess is a legitimate concern for him moving to Jacksonville.
What did he finish last year, AJ Green? Because that was my bold prediction of being a top. What was it, like top 25 or top 30?
It was top 25 that we made predictions for. So
AJ Green,
he was 41st. Hit that.
But yeah, so
I mean, not as far down as I thought.
Yeah.
My biggest thing though is it's just that we haven't seen Kyler be able to support multiple receivers. So him and Hopkins are going in very similar ADPs. If it's me, you have Amon-Ra St. Brown, which he has a murky situation in Detroit with there's just so many new bodies there. You have Jameson Williams coming back at some point during the year. You have Moon. I would rather have like someone like Mooney that's going to be there. Allen Robinson falls into that tier, which he is into that. We've seen another receiver thrive in this offense before. Michael Thomas is in that range right now. I anticipate that he's going to continue to climb as he's getting good reports out of camp. I would much rather have any of those three before I would take Marquise Brown. But I do think that Marquise Brown. What's that?
I'm good with any of them, honestly. It's just going to matter how your draft falls. But if Hollywood Brown is there in the 6th or 7th, I'm absolutely looking at that. I'm banking on the connection that they form in the first 6 weeks that'll still keep him at 6 to 8 targets a game.
Yeah.
He'll just be like, screw DeAndre. We don't need him. Cardinals will start out like 6-0 like they did last year or something like that, and Hollywood will be the guy.
He's taking those roids because he knows he's fallen off.
A new face in Vegas in the form of Devontae Adams has kind of changed the way that you look at the Raiders wide receiver room. Can Hunter Renfro repeat what he did last year? Obviously, we can segue this at the end and talk about Darren Waller's value as well going forward, but Devontae Adams' presence in the Raiders room definitely changes that fantasy perspective quite a bit.
Yeah, I don't know what to make of the Raiders situation right now. Going into the research that I've been doing, I was kind of thinking that you needed some threshold of touchdowns in order to be able to sustain multiple players from like a fantasy perspective, but touchdowns really isn't the MO, which bodes well for Derek Carr because he's very much a high yardage passer, but he's only broken 30 touchdowns once in his career. So he's not somebody that gets a lot of touchdown passes. That could be for the talent that he's had around him in the past. But it's definitely going to be interesting to see how it shakes out. There were some vacated targets in Vegas. I think that Devontae Adams ultimately has a reduction in the targets that he was seeing relative to what he got in Green Bay, just because it was him and Aaron Jones, and that was pretty much it. But I think that they all have rules and they all kind of hurt each other in a sense. I don't think that any of them will perform to the levels that they had at their peaks. But I think that they all can definitely be serviceable. I probably won't mess with Renfro just because I think that there's too many mouths to feed, and I think that Waller ends up being the second target on that team and not Renfro. Renfro benefited from Waller being injured, and then also when he was on the field, kind of taking that primary coverage. But Davante Adams is unguardable. He'll get his. They're going to game plan around him. Josh McDaniels has proven that if he has talent, like he's going to scheme around that, and I think that's what they'll continue to do.
I know this is going to sound completely ridiculous, but I'm going to say it anyways.
Brother.
I think that the Raiders, not in terms of success on offense, but they're going to kind of be like the Patriots light when they just went completely nuts with Wes Welker and Randy Moss. And I don't think it's because of their talent. I think it's just because of how much they're going to have to throw the football to stay in games in that division. Playing against Denver twice, Kansas City twice. Obviously, the Chargers are going to be throwing the ball all over the place. They're going to be scoring close to 30 points a game. I think that they're just going to be throwing the ball so much that I think that they're going to be able to sustain at least Adams. And I do like Renfro, especially at his ADP, because the dude is catching 80% of his targets. His ADOT is at 6.8. And if he's getting 8 targets a game and he's catching 6 of them, and if he's getting like 15 yards a clip, he's near 100 yards at that point. And if he can just sneak into the end zone once every now and then, I think that he's going to fall within a wide receiver 30 at least. And he's going to be a viable flex option. But I just think that he's going to be able to do more than that because he had 128 targets and he caught 103 of them last year.
The biggest thing that worries me about Hunter Renfro is
it's his touchdown equity for me, obviously.
Well, but he was also the primary red zone target for Carr last year. I don't see a scenario where you're throwing the ball to Renfro over Adams ever.
So
just knowing how what's that?
How many touchdowns did he have last year? I didn't think it was that many yet.
So Renfro had 25 targets and 9 touchdowns in the red zone last year and then Waller only had 15.
Yeah. So how about this though? So wasn't Hunter Renfro like a top 15 wide receiver last year? Something really insane. So if you just he was wide receiver 10 last year. So if you just drop him down to peg and he scores 5 or 6 touchdowns, he still should be in the top 25. It's
Maybe.
Just that he's not wasting his targets.
Right, but who else besides Waller, his competition was Bryan Edwards, Willie Snead, Zay Jones, Foster Moreau. Like there was literally no one
Jacobs
else.
is having the same type of target share or share in the offense. I just don't think that. I think that they're going to be throwing the ball a ton. Derek Carr shows that he can do it. He was the leading passer in the NFL through week 12 last year.
Right, but he just doesn't get the touchdowns. That's the only thing that's scary. Drake and Jacobs were only targeted 6 times apiece in the red zone. So they aren't really I guess it doesn't matter because it's a new scheme, but they were definitely more of the throw the ball. Although Jacobs did have 9 touchdowns and 38 attempts inside of the 20. But yeah,
room to fall off and still be good.
Yeah, I agree. It's just from a strategic standpoint, I don't want wide receiver 3s on my team. He could have good weeks. I would rather have somebody.
But I don't think Waller's the number 2. I think that he's talented, but they were looking to trade him this offseason, and I'm not ignoring that. He was almost in the deal for Davante Adams, but there was a rule that said that a guy that's franchise tag can't be traded for another player. It has to be picks. Sure. That's the only thing that kept Darren Waller in Las Vegas. I don't think that he's the guy at 2. I think that Hunter Renfro is a Wes Welker type.
He had more targets than Renfro though, and I anticipate Adams being the number 1 target guy for him. So
that Pats offense had Gronk, Randy Moss, and Wes Welker all in like really high in their fantasy rankings that year.
I'm not going to compare.
You're not going to be.
Nope. Stop talking. We got the clip.
They're not going to be that. And I started with that, but if they're just
not in the clip,
if they're light of that, it's like when I said the Packers were like the Browns rushing attack last year. It's just that they're a lighter version of that. And it's not because they're good. It's because their volume of passing is just going to be so high to me just to stay in these games.
Right.
Better than the greatest show on turf.
I would just rather have Michael Thomas, Juju, Elijah Moore, like guys that are going to be the number one target on their team.
Definitely.
I didn't think that he was going to be. I didn't think he was in that tier, to be quite honest with you. I thought he was in a lower tier than that. I would
take somebody we talked about earlier was Gabe Davis. Give me Hunter Renfro times 1,000,000 over Gabe Davis.
Yeah, I would do the same. I'm not ignoring that Hunter Renfro could be a viable flex option.
Yeah. I would just rather not have guys on my bench that I probably never can actually play.
He's just the type of guy that you're going to look as a bye-week fill-in.
Yeah.
Also, Kenneth Walker didn't practice today. Whatever.
Who cares? Darren Waller, you just mentioned him, so we can transition to tight ends on that note after we answer this question that just came in. Mixon, Akers in a first for Jonathan Taylor, Damian Harris in a seventh. Who wins the trade?
Mixon and Akers for me. Taylor's obviously a stud, but those guys both have top 10 potential at running back.
Top 10?
Akers is going as running back 14, and Mixon's going in the top 10.
Oh, I know what he's going as.
They could be top 10 running backs this year.
I don't like Cam Akers as much, but
I would say,
I get it.
Yeah.
Good.
Akers, based off of ADP, is currently running back 18. Damian Harris, obviously, a little bit further than that. He had a good season last year, but Ramondre is hungry.
But none of his points is touchdowns. Like
to me, Akers and Harris are a wash. Getting Mixon in a first for Taylor is an easy win.
And a seventh. There's a seventh involved here too.
Don't care about that.
Who are you picking in the seventh round? Who are you picking? If you had a rookie draft right now, who would you pick in the seventh round?
This could be like a keeper redraft though.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying,
that's Hunter Renfro.
that changes everything for me.
So wait, are we all on the same side on this?
Mixon Akers,
sure.
Wow. All right. Look at us. No, but anyway, back to the Darren Waller thing. Obviously, you guys sounded like you were on opposite ends of the spectrum here, maybe a little bit in terms of Darren Waller this year.
I like his talent. It felt like they were giving up on him kind of by looking to deal him.
Well, let's look at this a different way.
You have a guy that you're close with that's covers the Packers, right? Wasn't he talking about the whole Darren Waller? What did he say again about the Darren Waller trade?
In terms of what?
Well, he almost got traded for Adams, but then they had that rule that a franchise tag player can't be traded for a player. But then after
they still were talking afterwards.
But they didn't roll over. Like, I don't know if Darren Waller's had injury concerns in his career. So there's obviously concerns in the building that they were looking to deal him. If they got Adams without having to give him and they still talked about it, that means something to me.
I think aside from all that, he came out and was looking for a new contract because he made whether, you can say like a bad business decision or what, he signed a new deal the year before he balled out.
Yeah.
So he's on like a 3-year deal, very cheap for the production that he's given. So he's looking for a new deal. So I think that probably played into them more trying to move him than anything else.
They paid Renfro too. A pretty decent contract for him.
Yeah. But, I don't think it's a situation where like the Raiders are like trying to trade him or anything like that now. I think that they're just, so I still think he's going to be pretty heavily involved in the offense. I would say is the number 2 target before Renfro, but it wouldn't surprise me either way.
Yeah, I think they'll be close. They were within 1 target of each other. It's just, we all know who the alpha is in that offense now.
For sure.
So it's like, how much is that going to eat into what they did last year?
I just think people are completely rolling over on Renfro and forgetting about him as an option. I still think that he could be viable and worth it as a roster spot.
If tight end didn't suck so much, they probably would agree with Waller as well. But even if Waller gets like 6 targets a game, that's still going to be better than most players on a weekly basis from like a tight end perspective. So I think that's all that it comes down to. Like Renfro, there's a lot more competition. Wide receiver feels deeper than ever, and tight end feels very thin. So I think that's a lot more of the narrative that gets pushed. But I definitely hear what you're saying.
an interesting point to that, Joe, is one thing that we have on here at tight ends is like, where do you feel like the cutoff is? Like, where are you comfortable with taking a tight end? You know, where do you feel comfortable with a tight end each week?
Yeah. So in my dream world, I am picking in the top half of the first round. Mm-hmm. I am selecting a running back that I am really excited about, probably CMC, because I like to live dangerously.
You love him.
I do love him. I would, but I'm already committed, so I can't. But if it don't work out, CMC, give me a call, all right?
Move to Utah. Tyler, tell him what's up.
But so I don't think this is that controversial, but this is a hill that I'm dying on this year. I think Mark Andrews takes over as tight end 1, and Kelsey takes the back seat all the way down to tight end number 2. If we're just looking at targets per game, average depth of target, and yards per outrun, Mark Andrews is exceeding all of those. Lamar is looking at positive TD regression going into this season. So I think Mark Andrews, even though he's going around like in the 3rd round, that's somebody that I'm targeting pretty heavily. Actually, he's going like late 2nd or early 3rd, depending on the size of your league. But I would say the last person that I feel like very confident in is Kyle Pitts. Kittle and Waller, I feel okay with. I think Kittle still has the opportunity to potentially be a top 2 target getter. His biggest thing for me is more injury related. He just hasn't really been able to stay on the field. And if I'm going to field the all injury team, I'd like to have some diversity, I guess. And then you have a guy like Dalton Schultz who could also slide into like a top 2 target potential role. But it really just, I don't know. I don't think beyond, like if I'm late in drafts, I would imagine trying to get Pitts in like the 3rd round. If I'm early in drafts, I'm probably looking at Andrews in the 2nd. I think that having a viable tight end is just very important. I think that I would probably be waiting more on the quarterback front. I think I'm all in on either Jalen Hurts or Trey Lance this year because of the rushing upside. So those are players that I can target in the 2nd or 3rd round while still getting 2 running backs before you get into the running back dead zone. And then you just get to work on getting as many potential wide receiver ones as you can find in that middle area. But yeah, I don't feel comfortable beyond Pitts. If I don't get Pitts, then I probably will punt to like Cole Kmet.
Yeah.
Before Drew goes, I just want to say one thing here about Andrews, which, by the way, if you were to get him in like the middle part of the 2nd and you truly believe he's going to finish as the tight end 1, that is stupid value on its own. Because look at Kelsey, where he was being drafted at last year, assuming that he was going to be like the consensus tight end 1, going like 8th, 9th overall. If Mark Andrews is that guy this year, that's stupid value.
Mark Andrews was tight end 1 last year.
Yeah, but I'm saying when people were drafting last year.
Right, but I'm just saying you said you think he's going to overtake him. He already did.
Oh.
Right, but people are still viewing Kelsey as tight end 1.
Yeah, so. And Travis Kelce's efficiency was down last year, but losing Tyreek Hill, you got to think that he's somehow going to get better based off that.
Maybe.
My cutoff for tight ends is Dalton Schultz. If I don't get one of the big guys, I will not leave a draft without Dalton Schultz, because it's just after that, to me, it's all dart throws and they're all touchdown dependent guys. Dawson Knox, Hunter Henry, they had 9 TDs last year. Without those, they were essentially unstartable.
The only thing I would say about Hunter Henry, though, is that he does have a potential to be a top target option on that team. But you're right. It's a complete dart throw, especially now that they've added Devontae Parker, who is probably my biggest wide receiver sleeper for this season. I think he's going to come in and tear it up in New England.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to say something about Dawson Knox because of, some targets obviously being vacated there.
I don't like Dawson Knox.
Yeah, I'm completely out on him. I do want to bring up one thing. I think that Kyle Pitts has the potential to be the number 1 tight end this year. I already said it last week. That's my bold prediction. But I was like looking back at Marcus Mariota and how he actually handled the offense when he was in Tennessee. And when he was there, all of his targets were being filtered to the tight end. Delaney
Walker, yeah.
Delaney Walker was a monster. In 2015, he had 133 targets, 94 receptions for 1,100 yards, 6 touchdowns. He was tight end 2. All of this is behind Gronk, obviously, because he was just insane.
Yeah,
2016, he had 102 targets, 65 receptions, 800 yards, 7 TDs. 2017, he had 111 targets, 74 receptions, 800 yards, and 3 TDs, and he missed a few games. So if Delaney Walker, no slouch, obviously he was a good player, but he isn't the physical freak that Kyle Pitts is. And Drake London obviously is going to take some time to develop into that role. I know that over the past 10 years, the first wide receiver drafted in fantasy has been a top in the rookie draft for fantasy. He's been a top 30 wide receiver every year, but it takes a little bit of time before the wide receiver steps in. Look at when Santonio was drafted. He was a nobody until week 11, and then he just completely popped off at the end of the year for his rookie year. I think that'll take some time for London. I think Pitts is just going to he could get upwards of 10 targets a game. Their defense is terrible. They're going to have to throw a ton. I just think that the amount of volume he should get, obviously you brought up the fact that they haven't been throwing the ball in the red zone. Hopefully that changes because he's going to have to score at least 10 to 12 touchdowns to match what Mark Andrews and Travis Kelce does. But I just think that his volume is just going to be nuts. I'm looking at upwards to 170 targets for me.
Yeah, I think what'll be interesting is if you look at his numbers, I mean, at the end of the day, even if Drake London becomes what everybody expects him to be, Kyle Pitts is still a top 2 option in that offense. And like you said, the game script is going to be negative for the foreseeable future. But I would say that outside of Kelce, Andrews, Pitts, and Kittle, there's no other guarantees about who's going to be a top 2 target on their team. So it's if you can lock it in.
I'm worried about Kittle.
Yeah, I mean, with all the stuff that we're hearing about Ayuk, that could obviously change. But it's hard to know. But I think that's why he's no longer a top 3 player in the tight end position. But I feel like Kittle and Waller are very much one and the same. A little bit banged up on the injury front. They've had really good years in the past, but there's a little bit more competition for targets. How's that going to shake out?
I would rather Dalton Schultz to either of those players. I know that sounds crazy, but I think that he's the number 2 on that offense.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I mean, you have Michael Gallup who's out. Michael Gallup has been a top 30 wideout in the past. So I think he can return to form. What's the rookie, Jalen Tolbert?
Yeah, but he is impressing from what I've seen. I've actually seen that there was a later round rookie that is impressing more than Tolbert is. And Gallup's ACL is still pretty beat up. There's a real chance that he's not going to be anything till middle of the season.
Sure. Yeah. I think if I don't get one of the top guys, my plan is to get Zach Ertz for the first 6 weeks and then throw some darts and hope for the best. So people that I'm obviously pretty high on, Cole Kmet, he has a chance to be a top 2 target getter for Chicago. He's been somewhat decent. Let's see.
Irv Smith, if you wanted to bring him up. I like Irv Smith this year. He's struggling with this thumb injury, but there's a lot of talk that Minnesota's just going to be throwing the ball a ton.
Yeah, I mean, their new offensive coordinator, if you heard Justin Jefferson's interview, I forget with who it was, he was pretty much I wondered last year, why was Cooper Kupp able to be so open all the time? And then I learned this offense. He's I get it now, and that's me. And I was like, ooh, I like this. But yeah,
Irv Smith, about their head coach, Kevin O'Connell?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. I didn't even know. Do they even have an offensive coordinator?
He's running. He's going to be calling the plays, yeah. Which bodes well for Thielen and for Justin Jefferson. I just don't think that Irv can command enough attention. He only got 3 targets a game last year.
What about last year? Huh? Irv Smith was hurt for majority of last year, but Tyler Conklin was a pretty decent tight end. If you're looking at dart throws, though, he's going after tight end 15.
Oh, yeah. But I mean, I would rather take a chance on somebody like David Njoku, my personal favorite, Evan Ingram in Jacksonville.
I love Evan Ingram this year.
Or even someone like Brevin Jordan in Houston. You can definitely get him for free. And outside of Brandon Cooks, who do they really have there? So he could potentially take a step forward.
Dameon Pierce.
Well, he's a running back.
I just hope that he just commands so much there. I think he's so good.
But I think if you draft someone like Irv Smith or Tyler Higbee or Dawson Knox, even Pat Freiermuth, I think that their cap is going to be in that 6 to 10 range because they're just not going to get the volume.
They're all touchdowns.
So it's I am going to chase targets and are they going to be a top 2 guy? If you don't follow Andrew Cooper on Twitter or anywhere that he is active, he's really good on his stuff for tight ends.
You're doing him a disservice not following him. He's phenomenal.
Yeah.
Tyler he follows him.
Yeah, religiously. And you should, because
There you
his
go.
content,
Thought
especially related to tight ends, is really good. But
there you go.
if you know that somebody's going to be probably a 6 or 8 top tight end and you're guessing on tight ends, why not just wait and get somebody that also could fall into that? It's kind of the way that I see it. But yeah, I don't know. Well, it'll be interesting for sure. Tight end's such a wasteland. I think you're even seeing in a lot of leagues that people are moving away from having it and just having it as like an additional flex.
Right.
We'll see if it continues, especially like Kyle Pitts. You're not a tight end.
He's a tight end in my lineup. That's all I care about.
Right. Exactly. But yeah, it's definitely still a wasteland. But we'll see.
Anything else, guys? I don't know that we have. Well, you have sleepers in here. I feel like we've kind of been giving sleepers throughout, but
Yeah.
anybody that we haven't talked about yet that maybe jumps off to you at either position?
I mean, I mentioned Brandon Ayuk last week. I like him. We mentioned Bobby Trees. All these guys are essentially free. Alan Lazard is free.
Yeah.
Like, he's going to be the one, whether or not he's good. That's a different.
I don't know. Romeo Dobbs.
I like him too.
He's balling.
You know who could low key be like super nice this year and he was also free? Julio Jones. Look at what AB did in Tampa Bay.
That way, come holler at me because I don't want him on my roster, but I can't just give him away and just drop him.
Sure you can. We're friends.
He's just taking up space.
You could definitely just drop him.
But
yeah. Anything else, guys?
Who do you think is going to be the top scoring rookie wide receiver this fantasy season?
Oh, come on.
I had to ask it.
We're not everybody here is in Pittsburgh, but no. Man, that's tough.
I love Pickens a lot, but I just think
the opportunity's not right.
Treylon Burks. Those are the two that just
and that's the thing. Like the receiver that I like the least out of like that top group that was taken in the draft, right, is probably the guy I'm going with.
Yeah.
Is that Burks?
Yeah.
I like Burks. I know we talked about this during the draft. For some reason, I like him.
I'm going to go with Skye Moore. I think that Juju remains a slot option, and Skye Moore, if you look at his just like ability to beat man-to-man situations, I think it's really good. He's also good at being his own too, but did he really?
Yeah.
Dang. RIP.
Well, see, that's the thing. I was thinking just that top group I mentioned right before, like a Romeo Dobbs in Green Bay. I mean, the opportunity's there for anybody. Like if Alan Lazard's the de facto one right now, like you just got Christian Watson coming off the pop, and early returns there haven't been great from what I've seen. They think he's going to take some time to really adjust to the NFL, like where Romeo Dobbs, they feel like is able to step in and at least contribute right away. I don't know. I mean, if I'm looking for like a dart throw at this, a 4th round guy, that might be the guy I go with.
I like him. Yep.
Cool.
So I'll stick with that to be different from Drew's Treylon Burks.
I like it. We'll never talk about it again, just like the rookie QBs last year. Like I picked Zach Wilson. That was a great call.
Yeah, that was a good move. But I think that wraps it up. Another great show. Little preview for next week? What are we thinking in terms of a show, just to give the people an idea? Because we've kind of done like the pre stuff here the last couple weeks.
Yeah, I think week 2 of preseason is going to be like the most telling of like how we're expecting teams to roll out week 1. So I think we could start rolling through some like draft scenarios based on where you're at, like early, middle, late, and kind of walk through that stuff. I think that's
like it.
Yeah, it's mock draft season. I have a statement that I wanted to make before we get out of here.
Oh, God.
Is it
this an apology? Is it iPhone notes?
No. My biggest regret in my career doesn't involve calling Brandon Ayuk a breakout player or predicting that Saquon was going to come back from his ACL injury like Adrian Peterson did in 2013. And it definitely doesn't involve me calling Dak my QB1 last year because his skill positions were dogs. My biggest regret is that I'll never get to see me, Drew Hannes, do this podcast live. Sure, I can watch the podcast afterwards, but I can't imagine what it feels like to be all of you watching me do this. Like watching the Beatles or Antonio Brown perform on Heinz Field. I absolutely knew that was coming. I planned it out knowing. I almost texted you to tell you to have it ready because I knew that exactly what would happen.
You're lucky I didn't mute the mic halfway through that.
Well, that's
That
what I
was
wanted.
beautiful.
I didn't think I was going to read the whole thing.
All right. And on that note, guys, we'll be back next week. Like they said, probably go through some mock draft scenarios and stuff. This should be a pretty telling week for the way teams are going to shape out and for the way teams are going to operate when they roll out for week 1. So until next week, for Smitty, for Joe, for Drew, this has been the Around the 4 and 2 Fantasy Football Show brought to you by Teats Barbershop. We'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.
Like and subscribe.